Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
You are listening to Women's Running Stories, where exceptional women runners share inspirational stories about their running experiences.
So when I was 5.5 years old in June of 1959, it was one of the last polio epidemics, and I contracted paralytic polio. One day I was a healthy, vibrant ballerina running around the gym in kindergarten class. And the next thing I knew, I dropped to the ground. I was paralyzed initially from the neck down. And then, as often happens in polio cases, is I started regaining movement on my right side, but my left side remained paralyzed. And I had to go to a physiatrist, rehab medicine doctor, and fortunately, I was able to get to a specialist in polio, and he had an incredible physical therapist whose name is Ms. Holly. I really don't think I would have made it through without her love, her support. She was ahead of her time in the way that she had me read Dr. Seuss books before every painful physical therapy session. And then she'd lovingly lead me into her physical therapy treatment room. And while she was coaxing my muscles and nerves back to health, she would have me recite back in tandem Dr. Seuss. So like she would start, "The sun did not shine, it was too wet to play," from The Cat in the Hat. And then I would recite back, "So we sat inside all that wet, wet, wet day." Hi, I'm Mary McManus, and I am a most unlikely runner who lives in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. I am a polio and trauma survivor and thriver, a 2009 Boston Marathon finisher, an ambassador for the Boston Run Show, a retired social worker, an author, poet, blogger, a mother of 37-year-old boy-girl twins, and a wife to an amazing husband.
Yes, in this episode, you are going to hear the running story of Mary McManus, who did survive polio and childhood trauma, and in her 50s, Mary became a runner. And running became an integral part in Mary's healing process. But before we hear more from Mary, I want to welcome you to Women's Running Stories. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. This is a powerful story, and I am so glad you are here to listen to it. On to Mary's story. Mary did have intensive therapy after contracting polio, and her condition did improve. But the disease had a lasting impact on her ability to move. This led to taunting and teasing from other children, especially when it came to physical activities. And certainly there was no encouragement to take on a sport like running. In addition to experiencing the difficulties of polio, Mary experienced physical and sexual abuse at the hand of her father, who began to abuse alcohol when she was 8. Mary would also come to discover that her mother had an addiction to prescription pain medication. And while Mary credits the love and support of adults outside of her family for helping her through these very dark times, the traumatic experiences of polio and her home life, it took her years to overcome. And that is what Mary's story is all about. Overcoming challenges, persevering through times of great darkness and struggle, with a strong belief in her ability to heal. This is where she focused her energies, and she went on to become a social worker for the Veterans Administration, or the VA. She's a wife and she's a mother, and ultimately she became a marathon runner and made running a part of her life. In this story, Mary does talk about the Boston Marathon, and there are a few things to know. The Boston Marathon starts in the town of Hopkinton, and it passes through many towns, including the town of Natick, which you will hear Mary mention. The course also features the famously hilly section that includes Heartbreak Hill. This comes toward the end of the race, around mile 21, and then a mile later, runners pass through another landmark, Cleveland Circle. In here, Mary will also mention longtime race director Dave McGilvery. All right. Now, Mary's running story did start later in her life. Like I mentioned, she didn't start her running until she was in her 50s. And the decision to take up running had its origins in yet another health crisis that Mary began to feel coming on a decade earlier in her 40s. And that is where Mary begins. So let's get to it. Here to tell her story is Mary McManus.
Probably in my early 40s, I started having these symptoms. And I was experiencing a lot of fatigue. I was experiencing chronic pain. I was limping, and I just ignored it initially. And the symptoms started getting worse and worse. And after 10 years of being in pain and being anxious and depressed and not knowing what was happening with my body, I realized that I needed to do something. And so I told my primary care provider, I said, something doesn't seem right. And I said, I know about the diagnosis of post-polio syndrome, and I'm wondering if maybe that's what I'm dealing with. Oh, no, he said. This is all psychiatric. He said, you do have trauma from your childhood. That's probably what's going on. And I knew in my gut that, no, I don't think so. There's really something that has to be taken care of here. And so I Googled post-polio syndrome, and I found out that, in fact, there was a clinic through Spalding Rehab here in Boston that was dedicated to polio survivors, and that there was this cluster of symptoms that defined something called post-polio syndrome. Now, there's no blood test, there's no MRI. It's basically a diagnosis of exclusion. So I went through extensive testing, diagnostic testing, blood tests, everything you can imagine. And in fact, the only test that came back abnormal was a muscle function test that showed that I was having issues with the functioning of my muscles. And I also found out that this condition is called a progressive neuromuscular disease. And they said, there's no cure. There's nothing you can do. You need to quit your job. I was an award-winning social worker, getting ready to retire in 3 years, but they said you need to retire now. You cannot wait because the symptoms are just going to get worse and worse, and stress will certainly aggravate the condition. And they told me that I might need a feeding tube because the left side of my esophagus was sluggish, and that I should get something called a sleep apnea machine because I might not be getting enough oxygen at night. And they said that eventually I would end up in a wheelchair. And the list went on and on and on and on. And at first, I said, well, okay, I'm going to do everything they tell me. And so I went through from December when I got the diagnosis until February, and this is 2006 to 2007. And I went through a period of anger, frustration, grief, you name it. And I went through occupational therapy, physical therapy. I was fitted with a leg brace. I was using a cane. And I also was referred to somebody I call my master magician. His name is Dr. El-Ab, because separate from the post-polio syndrome, because I had such a high pain tolerance that I used to survive growing up, I had let this pain that was in my neck radiating down my arm just go. It was just something I learned to live with, but it was progressively getting worse. Plus, I thought at one point I was having a stroke because the right side of my face would go numb. Well, lo and behold, I went for an MRI, And the one thing that did show up in all of this was, in fact, there was a disc pressing on a nerve in my cervical spine. Now, that was something that they could treat right away with trigger injections. And it was the first step in realizing, oh, I don't have to live with this kind of pain. I can ask for help, which was a really new concept for me, having grown up in the household that I did. And Dr. Elabd referred me to a physical therapist who was not part of the post-polio team. And, I've been blessed with all these angels in my life. And Allison said, you are not destined to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair. You have lost connection with your body, and I'm going to help you reconnect the mind-body connection. And I met her in January. And in February, I sat down and I asked for divine guidance. Ever since I was 5 and contracted polio, I felt this strong faith within me. And I felt, the presence of something greater than myself that I could draw from to help me. So in February of 2007, knowing that I was at a crossroads in my life, I sat down and I said, okay, I need guidance. What am I going to do? What am I going to do financially? What am I going to do with my life? I mean, I'd been a social worker all told for 25 years. And it's, what do you do now? And I sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to get still. I'm listening for some kind of guidance. And what happened was the answer came in the form of a poem. And the title of the poem was called Running the Race. And that opened up a portal to healing. And poetry started pouring out of me. And I started imagining myself as healthy, as running free. And I would have dreams at night. One of my favorite dreams was about coming out of my leg brace and dancing in the rain. I ended with my physical therapist in May, and I left my job. And then I was doing a home exercise program. In October, I met my personal trainer, and her name was Janine Hightower. I met, again, the theme of connections for me and how the universe works in my life. I was one of my veterans who became a volunteer. He knew Janine, and he said, you need to talk with her because I was starting a poetry business, New World greeting cards. But the bottom line is that when I met with her, she was telling me about her in-home personal training business. And so I wasn't thinking about my business. I was like, in-home personal training? I wonder if she can help me, maybe get a little stronger. I had trouble getting off of a couch or a low toilet seat independently. I was still in my leg brace. I was using a cane. And when she told me about her business, I said, well, Janine, do you think there's anything you can do to help me? And she said, well, we can give it a try. So she did an initial assessment, and I couldn't pass any of the things that she gave me to do. I couldn't do a push-up. They test your cardio by going up and down a big step. Couldn't do that. And my strength was limited. My endurance was limited. And I said, Janine, I'm not in very good shape, am I? She said, you're too young to be in the shape that you're in. And she said, I believe I can help you. She was working with a Parkinson's patient, and she'd seen how he had progressed. And she just believed in the mind-body connection, in the body's tremendous capacity to heal. And I began to believe that, well, given that my physical therapist initially had said I wasn't destined to be in a wheelchair, and given the fact that Janine had hope that I could function better, I still was using a tub bench to take a shower. And I was only at that point 53 years old. And after 6 months, she tested me again. And I was able to pass the cardio step test. I was able to do push-ups and all the other different things that she had me do, agility, things like that, and flexibility as well. And so this is 6 months later, and she says, okay, this is February of 2008 now. She said, well, we set goals. We set 6-month goals. What are your next goals? I'm thrilled with your improvement. Now, all the time that I am going through the physical personal training, I'm going through my spiritual and mental training, and I'm writing poetry, and I'm visualizing, and I'm imagining. I'm also healing my past by writing about forgiveness and gratitude. I also wrote letters to my family members who had abused me, forgiving them, and expressing gratitude that had I not lived through that, I would not be having the opportunity to have this journey of transformation. So I'm doing physical, mental, and spiritual work. And she asked me, what are my next goals? And I said, I want to come out of this leg brace in my polio shoes. I call them polio shoes. They were like what I wore when I had polio, only they were black instead of red. And I said, oh my gosh, I want to walk. I want to walk outside. I want to feel free in my body. I said, maybe take some kind of a class. I loved ballet when I was little before I contracted polio. I said, I don't know. I said, wow, I'm really feeling like there's all this possibility out there. So she's very excited. She's writing everything down. I'm very excited. And I said, Janine, wait. She had all of her things in her hands. I have one more goal. And I said, I want to run the Boston Marathon next year for Spalding Rehab. I know they have a race for rehab team. And she looked at me and she put down her things and she said, well, you are going to need a pair of running shoes. And of course, the funniest part in all of this is that night at dinner, I announced to my husband and daughter that I had new fitness goals. And they're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. You look so much better. We can tell you're feeling better. You're more independent. I could get off the couch and the toilet seat. And I was doing a lot better. And I said, so do you want to know what my next goal is? And they're nodding their head. And God only, they didn't know what was going to fall out of my mouth. And I said, Janine's going to train me to run Boston next year. And there was like a wink, wink, yeah, right, kind of thing. And I said, I'm serious. I want to join the race for rehab team. And they said, oh, well, my husband was a runner before. My daughter was a self-proclaimed couch potato. And they said, well, you're not going to run it alone. We're going to run it with you. And it was sort of like yeah, right, you're going to run this, but yeah, we'll go along with it. And they didn't know quite how serious I was. So the first biggest milestone was when I ran for 30 minutes continuously. And it was like, wow, this is really awesome. After I was able to do that, my first race was a 5K. It was a lovely neighborhood, very friendly 5K. And people were cheering me on, and my husband was running through the streets saying, my wife's a polio survivor, this is her first race. And that was like such a thrill because I was used to being taunted and teased. And here I was out on the roads and, people are celebrating me. And it was fun. I mean, it was like for me to have fun in my body. It was like, wow, this is amazing. I didn't know this was possible. It was almost like, and we were running through sprinklers because it was a very hot and humid day. So it was almost like that dream of just being out there and being free in my body. That was absolutely amazing. One of the biggest milestones was the Marathon Sports 5 miler in July. And it was, and even to this day, I still say it was the toughest race I'd run. It was late in the evening, and I was still in the early phases of recovery in terms of having endurance and being able to have energy by the end of the day. It was hot, and it was a very fast field, and everybody took off. And it was my first experience of being left since polio days, because in polio days, there was no disability awareness. So everybody took off, and there I was literally limping, trying to catch up. So it brought back all those memories. And I couldn't tell where the tears and the sweat, where the tears ended, where the sweat began. And fortunately, the marathon sports team, they sold me my first pair of running shoes. They knew my story, and they made sure that I was okay out on the course. It was such a blessing. And my husband wouldn't let me quit. I said, you could be up with the other runners. He said, just stop it. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. He said, we're going to finish this race, and you are going to run the Boston Marathon. And so I finished that race through this unknown course in the roads of Weston, in darkness. But fortunately, the volunteers stayed, made sure I had water. And when I crossed that finish line, they had the air horn, and they celebrated me as though I had broken the finisher's tape. And that was an incredible moment, and a pivotal moment that I knew if I quit, I never would have made it to Boston. But I also knew that by persevering and running through those very, very tough miles, that I was going to be able to finish Boston. So I rested a lot during the training, as anybody does when they're training for a marathon. The body needs time for rest and recovery. Mine needed more. So that rest time, rather than focusing on the fatigue, rather than focusing on the pain, and let me tell you, there was pain. And one of the things that I always knew when I set out on this journey with Janine was that I was going to feel pain. So am I going to feel pain on the side of health and wellness and recovery? Or am I going to feel pain on the side of atrophy and not moving? Because either way, there's going to be pain. So the way that I managed that pain, and the way that I managed the fatigue, and the way that I managed all these new sensations in my body was to use my rest time for meditation and visualization, and for telling myself that this was a good thing I was doing for myself. And I ultimately believed it was going to be a good thing I was doing for something beyond myself. And I visualized only success. And even though I'd never run a marathon, I was just starting to run races, but I just had a sense of what that was going to feel like. So I also reconnected with Dr. Bernie Siegel, and he is considered the father of mind-body medicine. And I've had many health crises throughout my years, and I met Bernie back in 1984. So part of my mental preparation was I rejoined Bernie's forum. It was an online forum, and then I also was in regular communication with him, and he was helping me do a lot of the mental preparation. And one of the stories that really I was able to embrace when I first set out on the journey with post-polio syndrome is a story about Evie McDonald, who was diagnosed with ALS, and she was also a polio survivor. And she is one of the few people who has made a full recovery from ALS through loving her body and harnessing the power of the mind-body connection. So a lot of my mental preparation had to do with, okay, this is what Evie did. So that was part of my mental preparation, was finding these stories that were going to inspire me. And Billy Mills, I found his video where he talked about how he won in the 1964 Olympics, and he talked about his mental preparation. So finding these stories, and then also through writing the poetry and just firing up my mind and knowing that I always say the unlikely runner within me was born in my imagination. And it was, yes, I was doing the physical preparation, but without that mental preparation, that's what really fired up my cells, fired up my muscles, fired up the connections between the muscles and the nerves, overriding all of the script of polio and abuse. I finally got to race day. And so my husband, my daughter, and I, we had everything all ready. Spalding Race for Rehab team did an amazing job at getting us physically and mentally prepared for race day morning. So we had our breakfast, we got to Spalding, and we had a little bus just for our team. And I listened to Bernie Siegel meditation, and I closed my eyes because I didn't really want to see how far it was that we were going to be driving out, and the only way back was on my two little feet. Although we had, of course, done the long runs, and I'd done 20 miles, but the only run we did from Natick to the finish line, we had never gone from Hopkinton anywhere. So this was a new experience to start in Hopkinton. And I deliberately, during my training runs, I didn't want to start in Hopkinton. I wanted that experience to be very fresh for race day. So we got there, and then we were in a heated tent. It was a cool morning. And our team leader, if you will, from development, wrote our names on our Spalding jackets and also down our arms, because she knew that we were going to peel off layers as we came in town, and on our singlets. And we just, we said a prayer, and she let us out because I got an early start as a mobility impaired runner. So we went out, and there was Dave McGillivray saying that he would be giving the oral command for the start of the race. And it was this atmosphere that was, like, I felt like I was in a dream. I felt like, wow, I'm at the starting line of the Boston Marathon, and I'm going to finish this thing. And there were some other athletes who also had physical challenges, but a very small group. And I felt the butterflies, and I felt exhilarated, and I felt like it was my victory lap. And before I knew it, Dave McGillivray said, "Runners, take your mark, get set," and off we went. And we just went town by town by town. And we knew where different people in our village, my new village and my old village, I mean, people who I'd known through the years who supported the run were out on the course. And so I just was, pacing myself. I knew that Janine was going to meet us on Heartbreak Hill and was going to go in with us, as was the team trainer from Spalding. And I had an energy healer that I worked with who was a physical therapist. So I knew when I got to Heartbreak, there was going to be a whole lot of people there. But regardless, because we had an early start, we were able to experience the thrill of the crowds. And there were other friends that I had met along the way who actually caught up to me because they started later. And somehow I bumped into these people that I knew. We were high-fiving. And I knew that once I made it to Heartbreak, I knew I was golden. And we walked, ran the hills. And then my son met us in Cleveland Circle. This was back in the day when, you couldn't have people come in with you and everything. So it was really amazing. And when I took that ride on Hereford and left on Boylston, I was like, oh my God, I did it. I went on to run 3 Bermuda half marathons in 2016, 17, and 18. And at that point, I thought my endurance days were over. And I was very happy. I was very happy with that. So I went back to 5Ks. But then in 2023, at the urging of my daughter, she said, "What do you want to do for your 70th birthday? You need something epic." We decided to do the Bermuda 10K. And so I trained for that. I got COVID in December. The race was in January. So I was not able to finish on the course, but I just went out on May 4th, did my 10K. And then I decided that I'm going to work on speed for my 5K. For me, my first goal is breaking an hour. So last Saturday, I did a virtual race. And I did a solo run, and it was really hot. And I said, "I know, don't push yourself in the heat." And I'm like, "Nah, let's forget about that. I'm good." And so I actually did a 59:36 last Saturday, which age graded is 41:41. So that's really cool. So I'm really working on my pace. I love doing fartleks. It's so much fun. So right now I'm working on my speed for a 5K. And my ultimate goal is sometime next year, I want to do another half.
When Mary runs that half, she will be 71 years old. Absolutely incredible. And I do wish Mary strength and wellness as she goes after these running goals and whatever goals she aims for thereafter. Mary, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your incredible story. I really, really appreciate it. You can join me in keeping up with Mary McManus by following her on social media. Please see the show notes for links to her accounts and for a link to her website where you can learn more about Mary. Something that really struck me about Mary's story is how there are so many different opportunities to set goals in running that can keep us engaged for years and years and years. And that does bring me to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I always appreciate you being here. And I would love it if you could rate and review the show. You can rate shows on Spotify, and you can rate and review on Apple. And I always love seeing those reviews come in. Thank you so much. That is going to do it for me. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And until next Tuesday, I do wish you healthy, joyful strides forward. Women's Running. Women's Running Stories.
Welcome to Easy Conversations, a podcast about covering the incredible human ability to overcoming adversity. I am Furkan Dania. I'm a therapist and mental health advocate. Each week, my objective is to sit down with a guest and share their story of how they were able to find meaning and purpose through their adversity. These are conversations that we have deemed to be difficult, but they don't have to. Together, we can find a shared understanding. This is a podcast for everyone.